I think we are on. I'm Jimena Valdez-Sessler, and I'm the chair of the Temple Museum Committee. And on behalf of committee members, and on behalf of our Temple Museum Director, Sue Koletsky, I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon program. So several committee members have collaborated with the speakers on this Warhol exhibition series of programs. And thank you, Joan Cohn. I know you collaborated on the program today. And thank you, Rabbi Dadoun, for agreeing to enlighten us on Louis Brandeis' life and work. Rabbi Dadoun has been with the temple for about 3 years, plus minus, and she has added an extra energy to an already outstanding and energetic group of temple clergy leaders. And she has strong following on her Learn with Rabbi Dadoun programs and with her Family Shabbat programs. I'm sure your presence today here, whether you are virtually present or in person here at the chapel, will be greatly rewarded by Rabbi Dadoun's program, Louis Brandeis' Passion Turned Legacy. Thank you, Rabbi Dadoun. Did you want to say?
And I also want to just greet you and thank you all for being here. It's so nice to see everyone. This is our third program out of 10, because we have 10 personalities that Warhol did for the 10 Jews. And they've all been just so warm and very kind of laid back in the way that we want to listen to what we're going to be hearing, but that we also want to contribute and have time to have discussion and feel that we are really learning together. Rabbi Dadoun always does that, so that I'm sure will happen. But anyways, again, thank you for being here, and also for the people who are watching on live stream. We're really appreciative to your attention here. Thank you. Do you need your mic? Okay.
Parts about being a rabbi, and there are many, or a clergy member in general, and I think my fellow colleagues will attest to this as well, who are both here, is that sometimes there are certain historical figures that we view in a different lens because of their Jewish accomplishments, right? So I always love that, there's this, when we see somebody who's Jewish, there's a certain acknowledgement, oh, you're Jewish too, okay, oh, you're Jewish, okay, right? When I used to live in New York City, one of my favorite things was on Purim, everybody dresses up, and you get on the subway, and everybody looks at you like you're a little bit crazy, because why are you dressed up? But the other Jews on the train are dressed up, so right? Oh, you're Purim, happy holiday, okay. So there's something very special in that way about Louis Brandeis, and that I actually learned about Louis Brandeis for the first time through a Jewish lens. And of course, his role in the Supreme Court justice was very important, of course, but I actually learned about Louis Brandeis when I really studied his work was through his Zionist work, which is why I called it Passion Turned Legacy, because the work that he did to help the Zionist cause, especially during that time period, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes, was really remarkable. It was really a dream, and it's so interesting. People like Louis Brandeis and Theodor Herzl, who was creating a Jewish state was really his brainchild. They never really got to see the promised land, if you will. They never got to see Israel come into fruition in 1948. They died before that. So, but without their work, I really believe that Israel wouldn't have come to fruition in the way that it does today. So it's really wonderful to kind of, in a way, pull back the curtain and see the work that these magnificent people did. And today we're going to look at Mr. Brandeis, learn a little bit about him. I'm going to talk a little bit about his work as a lawyer and a Supreme Court justice. If I talked about all his work, we'd be here until Purim. So we're not going to do that. We're going to touch on that a little bit, talk about his personal life, and then we're going to flip and really talk about his Zionism and the work he did for Zionism. And then I'm going to, at the end, invite questions and ask Sue to come back up here and talk to us a little bit about the Warhol painting, and I hope to have an engaging conversation at that point. Does that work for everyone? Wonderful. Well, that's what's going to happen, so I hope so. Well, so in his early life, Supreme Court Justice Brandeis was born on November 13th, 1856 in Louisville, Kentucky. His birth name was Louis David Brandeis, but in the early years of his career, he changed his middle name to Dembitz, which is his mother's middle name. His parents, Frederica and Adolf, emigrated from Prague as a part of an educated elite and came to the United States in 1849. Brandeis's parents had 4 children, of which Louis was the oldest. The family dream was to start a farm colony, kind of like a kibbutz, in which all could participate and the profits would be for all to share. However, after experimenting in farm life, Brandeis's father, Adolf, found the work too laborious and monotonous and became intrigued by other industrial work. Brandeis attended public schools in Louisville, Kentucky, and the Annenrealschule in Dresden, Germany, and then entered Harvard Law School and graduated head of his class in 1877. After less than a year of practice in St. Louis, Missouri, he moved to Boston, where he had an active and prosperous practice until his appointment to the Supreme Court of the United States in 1916. In 1891, Brandeis married Alice Goldmark. He and Alice would be known as the couple that does everything together. Their marriage was loving, and the two would partner in work as well. In an engagement letter from October 12th, which you can see here in 1890, Brandeis writes to his wife Alice, "Alice, Alfred was wrong in saying that I am very much in love. No, this is not a passion, not a fever into which I have fallen. It is that I love you." That's how I imagine it sounds. He and Alice would go on to have 2 daughters shown in the picture above, Susan and Elizabeth. Very early on, Brandeis became known as the people's attorney, and that he represented the interests of those individuals who did not commonly have the privilege to have formidable advocacy. When the affairs of the Equitable Life Assurance Society of New York precipitated widespread alarm in 1905, Brandeis became the unpaid counsel for the New England Policyholders Protective Committee. This was a huge deal at the time because it remedied abuses by life insurance firms, and Brandeis devised a system used in Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut, whereby life insurance was offered over the counter by saving banks at rates within the means of the workers. The center image that you see here is a list of the first 21 banks in Massachusetts to participate in the savings bank life insurance. And the image all the way to the right is a letter to Brandeis dated January 14th, 1907, from President Theodore Roosevelt, who acknowledged receipt of his 2 articles on insurance Brandeis had authored and asked for advice on a report submitted by the District of Columbia Insurance Commissioner. Later that year, the Massachusetts legislature passed a law establishing savings bank life insurance. From 1907 to 1914, he defended against charges of unconstitutionality, statutes of various states prescribing maximum hours of labor and minimum wages, which we still utilize today. As an Associate Justice of the US Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor said that Her contributions to public service are but a pale imitation of the great Louis Brandeis, whose life and work set the standard for pro bono service, a standard which has not been exceeded in the intervening years. He devised what is still known to lawyers today as the Brandeis Brief, in which economic and sociological data, historical experience, and expert opinions are marshaled to support legal propositions. His most notable book of essays, called Other People's Money and How Bankers Use It, dealt with the control exercised by investment bankers over American industry. When examining all of his legal work, his distinguishing mark that shows up time and time again is that he held complete mastery of the details of his subject and the usage of his evidence. It was slow and deliberate, and it was said that he rarely used notes. And he would build up his cases from the particular to the general, using intricate details that he would weave together, which can help us understand that he really mastered his craft and was so familiar and comfortable with his research that his delivery was meticulous. And in August of 1914, Brandeis's life changed and became even busier than it had in previous years. He was invited to an emergency meeting in New York called to address the predicament of European Zionists following the outbreak of World War I and the closing of national borders. With European Zionist organizations separated from each other by the hostilities, New York offered a new home base for the movement. Now, Brandeis has never denied his Jewish heritage, but neither did he put it at the forefront of his personal or professional life. Growing up in his house, there was always a strong sense of social justice, as was disseminated to him from his mother. As a prominent and active member of the Boston legal community, he made customary donations to Boston's Jewish charities. In 1905, he spoke at the New Century Club of the 250th anniversary of the first settlement of the Jews in the United States. This was one of the catalysts that would forever change his relationship with the Jewish community in the years thereafter. After 1910, his exposure broadened from the world of the German Jewish merchants and manufacturers of New England to include Eastern European Jewish immigrant entrepreneurs and garment workers of New York, as well as the leaders of the National Jewish and Zionist communities. It's hard to say what inspired Brandeis to join the Zionist cause so late in his life. Some speculate that it had to do with his work fighting injustice, particularly having to interact with Jewish immigrants when signing his famous Protocol of Peace to ensure better working conditions for garment workers in New York. He also became personally influenced by individuals such as Aaron Aronson, the discoverer of wild wheat in Palestine, Jacob de Haas, the editor of Boston's Jewish Advocate, and once secretary to Theodor Herzl, and the founder of modern Zionism. His newly awakened passion for Jewish causes and Zionism opened the door to his Jewish communicable circles, where he was a frequent speaker on issues related to Palestine. He was also later elected a delegate to the 11th Zionist World Congress, which convened in Vienna in the summer of 1913. And while he declined to attend owing to other responsibilities, he sent a message that outlined his ideas for the social and economic development of Palestine on issues that had captured his interest. At an emergency session in New York in August of 1914, Brandeis was chosen chairman of the new Provisional Committee for the General Zionist Affairs. And this was mostly an honorary position established to attract contributors and support. And since his previous involvement in Jewish causes was modest, no one at the conference expected him to take such an active role. But Brandeis was eager to learn, acknowledging his own lack of Jewish education. And by the end of the conference, Brandeis was fully committed to the Zionist cause, ready to be a leader in the action as well as hold the title. Brandeis brought his legal experience to the organization by creating order in a somewhat chaotic environment, and even helped increase membership to the American Zionist movement from 12,000 individuals to 175,000 from the years 1914 to 1919. And what was particularly challenging was that the Zionist movement at this time was by no means unified, and there was even pushback within organizations that were actually on the same page. Here is a copy of a letter written by Brandeis to his colleagues where he tries to outline his ideas to unify organizations, and he really addresses the chaos and attempts to build bridges. I'm going to read it aloud because I have to imagine that it's a little hard to read from the screen. He says, he entitles it right at the top, Zionist Unity. He says, unity, of course, essential to our success, but the essentials of unity vary according to the time, the place, and the subject matter of our effort. He realized the fluidity, the volatility of establishing this new state. Unity does not necessarily imply uniformity, nor does it necessarily imply concentration of power. Ends for which we unite may sometimes be attained better by diversity in means and methods than by uniformity. They may sometimes be attained better by distribution of power than by its concentration. It is important that all Zionists should consider in what respect concentration of power and uniformity in methods and means are desirable, and in what respects distribution of power and diversity in methods and means will better serve our cause. We must, among other things, define the world organization and the federations, the proper spheres of initiatives and of others' action. He recognized the necessary diversity and the necessary means to which they could attain success in the Zionist cause. When Brandeis was confirmed as Supreme Court Justice in 1916, there he is in this photo, he is at the very top left. He continued to work behind the scenes on the Zionist endeavor, and his position allowed him to lobby government officials, including President Wilson, on Zionist concerns, most notably to gain American government approval of the Balfour Declaration of 1917. The Balfour Declaration was announced by the British government to support the establishment of Palestine as a national home for the Jewish people. It was the court's summer recess of 1919 where Brandeis finally made his one and only visit to Palestine, and he wrote to his wife Alice, "What I have seen and heard strengthens greatly my conviction that Palestine can and must become the Jewish homeland as promised in the Balfour Declaration." And after leaving Palestine after this first visit, he wrote to Alice again from the ship as he was nearing Marseille, saying, "I feel that we really know the main problems and difficulties and possibilities. All of my previous reading has become vitalized." Brandeis actively served the Zionist cause for 7 memorable years, from about 1914 to 1921. And in addition to growing the membership, he played an integral role in helping to shape the way the Balfour Declaration was announced to American audiences. And this was particularly important because this was a time where American Jewish immigrants had found their home in America to be the safe haven they had always been looking for. As a matter of fact, American Jewish leaders in America, many of them, including Isaac Mayer Weiss, the founder of the Hebrew Union College, the rabbinic seminary in Cincinnati, argued that Washington, D.C. was their new Jerusalem. And this was no surprise, as Zionism at the time was seen as a European national movement. Being an American came with its own and different identity, and for many American Reform Jews at the beginning of the 20th century, being an American meant liberation and religious freedom. Europe was still a very harsh reminder of the past, of their oppressed lives. And so in many ways, it's important to understand that Brandeis had to not only gain the trust of Americans to support the Zionist cause, but also much of the leadership of the reform movement as well. And he had to help translate the ideals of Zionism and ensure that people understood that Zionist ideals were deeply compatible with American ideals, and they did not juxtapose one another. And in many ways, European Jews viewed Zionism as a connection to the biblical promised land, where Jews would return to their home. But for many American-born Jews, including Brandeis, Palestine represented a land where Jewish dreams of social justice might be realized. And in 1921, these differences really came to light when Brandeis and Chaim Weizmann, the great European Zionist leader, began to openly dispute regarding the far-reaching ideological and cultural differences between American and European-born Zionists. And at such a volatile and important time when historical decisions were being made, these differences made it very challenging to move an agenda forward. Things got so heated between the groups that rumbling against Brandeis's leadership and lack of full devotion really began to surface. In June of 1921, at the Zionist Organization of America convention, which took place right here in Cleveland, the direction supported by Brandeis and his followers was defeated by those favoring the Weizmann approach, and the Brandeis group promptly resigned from leadership. Weizmann, watching from abroad, made remarks about Brandeis being old, and that Brandeis remains enshrined in Washington like an icon and waits for the worshipers to come and to kneel before him. Brandeis was extremely influential in American Jewish circles, and his contribution to the Zionist movement was integral to receiving American support. Brandeis took a step back from the Zionist Organization of America and continued to confer with his colleagues on Zionist matters, establishing the Palestine Development Leagues, the Palestine Co-Cooperative Company, Palestine Endowment Fund, and other agencies to provide support for social and economic programs in Palestine. And some of these programs thrived with the years. Brandeis passed the baton to others to lead as well, but his leadership didn't end. In the 1930s, he was particularly touched by the European plight, and on more than one occasion sought out the help of President Franklin D. Roosevelt on issues relating to Jews in Palestine. Brandeis helped to transform the American Zionist movement's image and identity. He assuaged Americans in their fear that supporting Zionism was somehow un-American, and made great efforts to show that supporting a Jewish state in Palestine is and continues to be very American, supporting American values and ideals. Brandeis explained that there is no inconsistency between loyalty to America and loyalty to Jewry. America's insistent demand in the 20th century is for social justice. That's also been the Jews' striving for ages. Brandeis's connection to Palestine was closely linked to his love of the land, and through his help of the first American established kibbutz in Palestine, which was founded in 1937, and named En HaShofet, meaning well of the judge, in his honor. Brandeis maintained contact with the founders of En HaShofet until his last days, and En HaShofet remains one of the most successful kibbutzim in Israel, where Brandeis's contributions are still honored. And now, at this time, I think we take a look at these magnificent paintings and pictures and try to explore why Warhol would choose Brandeis as one of his 10, and maybe talk about the differences in colors and shapes and thoughts. But first, I want to address any questions that anybody has or comments, and then I'll invite Sue Koletsky to share her wisdom. Yes, Mira. Oh, yes. Sorry, microphone. I moved too fast.
It's not really that important. Can you very succinctly tell us what the differences were between Weitzman and Brandeis that created that?
Yes. I just spilled water on the microphone in front of a lot of people.
Mazel tov.
So if I broke it, don't tell anyone. Anybody have an extra shirt? So, I mean, yeah, we can really get into it. There were also at this time there was a lot of different kinds of Zionism, right? And that's, I think, more important to understand. There was political Zionism, there was spiritual Zionism, there were different Zionisms that existed. Some people wanted to go back to the Holy Land because it was the Holy Land, and this is our land, and this is from the Bible, and we're Jews, and we're meant to be there. Some people, kind of like Herzl, understood that there had to be a safe haven for Jews. And what's interesting about people like Brandeis and Herzl, Theodor Herzl, is that they weren't particularly religious people. And yet they really saw this need to create a state, a place for the Jewish people because of all the pogroms that were happening kind of all over the world, but particularly in Europe. I also want to note, because we really don't talk about this enough, in the 19th and 20th centuries, there were Jews really living all over the world. And we don't touch enough upon the Jews that were living in the Arab countries, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Turkey, Morocco, Tunisia, who actually had a really lovely relationship with their Arab neighbors. Moreover, there were Jews living in Palestine, right, before it was called Israel, who also had an amazing relationship, for the most part, with their Muslim Arabs, with the Muslim Arabs that were also living there at the time. So it was kind of interesting when we talk about political Zionism and we talk about different perspectives of Zionism. When the Europeans started to come into Palestine, it was tricky for the Jews, for some of the Jews that were already living there, because they had an established relationship with the Arabs there, and things got a little bit switched up. They spoke Hebrew, they spoke Arabic, they did have a connection with some of the Muslim Arabs there. So it's very interesting when we talk about Zionism, I note this because so much of the Mizrahi Jews, the Jews that were living in the Middle East at the time, played a really important role. I won't say translating, but they did have a connection with many of their Muslim brothers and sisters that we kind of leave out of the story very often. We talk about the European journey coming to Palestine. So I say all of this because Chaim Weizmann and Brandeis really went at it very publicly. But I do want to also note that there were many streams of Zionism, and the approaches were all very different. And I'll say that personally, I think it's a miracle that the state was established, because we all know there's 20 Jews in a room and there's 30 opinions, which speaks to how passionate we are. And I think Brandeis's role in the United States in helping kind of translate the purpose of the cause was so important, was essential, because even many Jews in America didn't want to establish a state in the Middle East. They said, we have America. What do we need this Israel for? What is that? So it's really amazing. I know I answered your question very macro.
Behind you. Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry.
I actually have two questions. So what was it like for him to be involved politically as a Supreme Court judge, kind of like comparing now to then, I guess, maybe? And then what kind of anti-Semitism did he encounter?
Could you repeat your first question? I'm not sure I heard it correctly.
Well, like right now, the Supreme Court judges are supposed to not take any stands like when they're being approved for nominations, and now he was doing political stuff back as a judge, right?
Yeah, he was. So it's very interesting because there was anti-Semitism, obviously, in America, and he experienced a lot of it. Some people didn't want him sworn into office because of that, because he was a Jew, and he was the first Jew to be on the Supreme Court. What role did it play? I think it really focused his work. I think it made him feel, just from reading the things that he's done, I think it made him feel like he had to be sharper than everyone else to prove himself even further. You know, people in the United States, other government officials named it. Yeah, this guy has loyalties in Palestine, right? So even when he was a Supreme Court justice, he still experienced anti-Semitism. And when he brought much of the Zionist, when he spoke to the different presidents, different government officials, and was lobbying for Zionism, he was very aware that he had a, you know, Jew sticker on his head, right? That he was labeled that way, which again goes to speak to how important his work was, because he had to not only try to fight for Zionism, but also translate it for people to say that it is a democratic idea, right? It doesn't juxtapose what we're doing in the United States. And that's a really slippery slope. I don't know that it's the same way as it would be today. If we were trying to start in Israel today, I'm not sure what that would look like. I'm not sure. I think it would be a lot harder and more complicated as American Jews. Not to say that it was easy for him, but I think, but he also experienced great challenge and anti-Semitism throughout his career. If you think of something, please ask. Sue, will you tell us a little bit about the Warhols?
I'll tell you a little bit about.
I did have
I'm
one.
so sorry, please.
Excellent.
Why did his family move to Kentucky? What was the appeal in Kentucky?
He had relatives here in Kentucky that brought them here, and I think this farming potential, which fell through very quickly, was something that they were going to try to do in Kentucky. Yep. It was not unusual. A lot of German immigrants came to the Kentucky, Ohio area. Okay, now Sue Koletsky.
Thank you. So thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
And we'll have more questions as we go, but I just wanted to, first of all, invite you to the gallery after this talk. The gallery is open, and you get to see the actual silkscreen that Warhol did of Louis Brandeis. These two here are some of the 25 or so practice pieces, so to speak, that he did. When the one that you'll see in the gallery has a little different coloration. But the way that he did these, and I always think it's interesting to understand how an artist, the process, was that all of the people in this series were deceased. So usually Warhol would take pictures of the people that he was going to do portraits of. And they would be his photographs. There'd be no problem with copyright or anything else. He could take lots of different pictures, lots of different poses. But for this specific project, he had his studio assistants go and research all of these historic documents and photographs from the archives. So some of the pictures are from newspaper magazines, some are actually from specific artists. It's all listed as part of the portfolio. When you walk into the gallery on the left, you'll see there's part of the portfolio that talks about how many colors are on the screen, how many screens there were, because these are silk screens, and also gives attribution to who took the photographs. So in this case, there's a photograph, and he takes the photograph, the negative, and enlarges it, because the pieces are 40 by 32. So the pieces are enlarged, and he makes a screen, or what we would call a halftone, out of the negative. So you can kind of see like the photograph there, right? Then the next thing he does, and that's one screen. So there'll be one color. And then the next thing he does is he takes that same negative, or that same image, and he takes the opaque projector. Back in the day we had the opaque projectors, and makes it really big on the wall, and takes graphite and starts to use his hand to draw these wonderful energetic lines all over. And you can see they're pretty much the same in both of these, although because of the coloration being different, you can see the eyebrows here a little bit better than maybe right here, they're still black. So you get one image that's the negative. The next image is his hand, and when you can actually see an artist's hand, so to speak, in a piece, it really makes it magical and come to life. And the next series of pieces that he puts onto as he builds his silkscreen are colors, blocks of colors. And he uses what are called color-aid papers, which are very saturated colors in different shapes, and he places those throughout the actual silkscreen. Now in this one, when you go to the gallery, you'll see that he doesn't use this blue, he uses a much darker, more royal blue. And he also has a lot more fleshy color in the face. The orange is very dominant on the right rather. So he continued to do about 25 of these with his printer, Rupert Smith, until they got the exact image that they wanted with the right colors and everything. And then they printed 200 prints of all 10 of them. So they're really 2,000 pieces. And so this is an edition of 200. Then he gave his printer an edition of 5, and those are called printer's proofs. And the pieces that we have in the gallery are 3/5, the third of the 5th series of the printer's proofs. We were very lucky and blessed, basically, to be able to get this donation from Joel Saltzman and also from the Wolf family in memory of Leslie Wolf. The two families together donated all 10 of these to our collection that we're able to see and study. And we also had the Mizell family who participated with all the funding for some of the programs that surround it. So we've been very fortunate to have a lot of support for these specific pieces. So some of you might say, well, how did they even decide to do this series? And in a nutshell, Warhol was a commercial artist and was a very, very successful commercial artist in the 50s. Lived in New York, got to the very top of his craft, and then decided that he really wanted to go into fine art as well. And as you know, he's a big pop artist. He really changed the dynamics of how we look at the world. I mean, we see now cereal boxes and we see soup cans in a totally different way. We don't see it just as an object, we see it as fine art. He changed the way that we see the world, and he's really a genius for that. And so he was, doing all sorts of portraits, and specifically of socialites, artists, drag queens, people at Studio 54, so that he could make a lot of money. His paintings and his silkscreens went for easily $25,000 a piece, and then for an additional one, it would be another $15,000. Back in the day, in the 70s and 80s, that was a chunk of change. That was great. But that was so that he could really fund the factory, which is the way that he created his brand and how he pumped out all of his art. So he needed to support the printers and all. So he had gallerists, and he was, one of them was Ronald Feldman, who had a gallery in New York. And because Warhol had always asked, as a commercial artist, what should I do? What do I need to do for you? What's my assignment for you? For a shoe commercial, for this, for that. He would ask his gallerist, give me some ideas. I need some ideas. I want to know what to do next. And so at first, Feldman didn't really understand that he was truly asking for ideas, and finally he did, and he started to give him a few ideas. One was that he should do some more Golda Meirs, because he had done a really very successful print and painting of Golda Meir, and he was like, I've done Golda, And so then they said, how about the presidents of the United States? And he was like, nah, I don't think so. Anyways, after a few more suggestions, he said, how about 10 portraits of Jews of the 20th century? And Warhol clung to that idea, and he called them the Jewish geniuses, actually. The name of that we think of these as the 10 portraits of Jews of the 20th century was really the name that the gallerist gave it for an exhibition. But Warhol kept referring to these as the Jewish geniuses. So how do you select who these Jewish geniuses are going to be? 10. And what they did was Feldman talked to one of the gallerists at the JCC in Washington and Maryland, And she was very instrumental with her assistant, her research assistant, to come up with a variety of names. And when you go into the gallery, there are pieces of paper there that are documents, a historical document of Feldman's actual writing of the names of these. There were about 100 people that they were considering. Sometimes it says NJ. Those were people that were not Jewish, but they were still on the list, So they were really brainstorming. It was I wish I was there for that meeting, because you know how when you're in creative meetings where people are just throwing ideas out? That's what's on this piece of paper. You really see the genesis of what's going on. So they finally narrowed it down, and the one person, the last one that they weren't really sure about, was actually Louis Brandeis, because one of the other people that they were considering was Modigliani, who's the Italian artist, and he has a very heart-shaped face. And of course, when you're doing a project like this, you have the artist, who's very visual and wants things to come across with a very visual, powerful feel. And then you had the other people who were more interested in who are the people that should be in this portfolio. So Warhol really wanted Modigliani because he had that beautiful face, and he also was an artist. But Feldman, who was an attorney, wanted Louis Brandeis because he felt it was very important for this specific portfolio to have Louis Brandeis, who was the first Jewish Supreme Court justice, and he wanted his children to know, and his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren to know about Louis Brandeis. So here we are studying Louis Brandeis. I guess we could have another one on Modigliani, but here we are with Brandeis, and he's part of this very intense collection. So that's really the story of how we got them, how they were made, and how they were decided upon. Sure. And I really ask you to come to the gallery, because when you see these up close, and we have the opportunity to go pretty close to them, you really see the brilliance of color, you see the energy of these, and seeing them all together is just such a treat, and really very powerful. So we're so pleased to be able to present them as an exhibition.
Could you hang on?
You don't need this, do you?
And from what I understand, he is in this portrait in his judge robe. When you see the actual photograph, which I didn't add, but you can kind of see the top of the robe. So I think it's worth considering. And he has a serious pose, which I think is intentional, what he was known for. Does anybody have any other? Yeah, Candy. Oh, you're going to make me do some math.
How old was he when he got to be a Supreme Court
All right,
justice?
give me a sec. Let me do some math.
Thank you.
You might be.
56, and he was appointed in 16.
Very good, Maida. Very good listener. Yeah, 50. Yeah.
Why was the university named after him?
I don't know that answer in its entirety. I don't exactly know. Do you know? Okay. Anybody else know? Why was the university named after him? I don't know the answer in its entirety. I know a part of it, but I would want to answer
the
it
law
accurately.
school at the University of Louisville is also the Brandeis Law
Right.
School. But I don't know about the...
Did Warhol ever do a print of Modigliani?
That's a great question. Did Warhol do a print of Modigliani? I don't know. I don't think so, but he did so many, it might be there. Not for this series, that's what we know.
That's on our next collection.
Right.
The other 10 Jewish geniuses.
For sure.
think we should go look at the art.
Yes, please do have a cookie, have some lemonade, and look at the art. And thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.